guys, it's Kira and welcome back to another vlog. I feel like this vlog is kind of the start of a new chapter because we are now officially moved into our new home, and honestly we couldn't be happier. If you saw my last vlog, you'll know that us moving was a bit of an unplanned decision. We were told that our landlord was going to be selling the house that we were living in York, so immediately we were like, need to find somewhere new to live, and we loved where we lived in York. The house was really nice and also the location was excellent. We were so close to the river and to the park, and it just felt like a really nice place to be. So that had kind of set the bar really high for us because we didn't want to feel as though we were moving somewhere that we liked less than where we had been, and we didn't want to kind of panic and find ourselves just accepting somewhere or like moving into a house that we didn't really like just because we were stressed about having somewhere to live. So we ended up finding this place, and we feel so lucky that we did because it has ticked every single box for us. It's taken us out of York, so we've kind of had a bit of a location shift, but we couldn't be happier because the location is amazing. I feel like I'm just looking out of the window in my office right now. I've got a big tree in my window, not in my window, just outside of the window, and then I can just see like woodland and hills in the distance, and it is just like such a nice place to be. We still have like a little town nearby, so we've got cafes and shops that we can walk to, which is something that we really liked in York, but I feel like we're also a little bit closer to nature here, so it's ended up working out so well, and it feels, I don't know, is like serendipitous the right word, where everything just feels as though it's fallen into place. And it definitely goes to show that sometimes the most like unplanned changes of like events and the most unplanned sort of circumstances can end up being the ones that just work out for the best, because we had no idea we were going to be moving to this area, or of course that we were really going to be moving at all, and it's all kind of happened so quickly, but couldn't be happier because it all just feels as though it is exactly as it was meant to be. So welcome to the new house. We are officially in. This is our second week in the house now, and we are almost entirely unpacked, but as you can see from the blank space behind me, there is still one key thing left to be unpacked, and that is my books. So it is currently Monday lunchtime, and I'm planning to use my lunch break to get as many books unpacked as possible. The reason books have waited until last is because we have the IKEA Billy bookshelves, and we have the ones that have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shelves, so they're quite tall, and the staircases in the new house are quite narrow and also go around corners, so try as we might, we could not get the bookshelves up without taking them apart, so they ended up going a little bit on the back burner in terms of priorities, and we just had to wait until we had a few spare minutes to actually assemble them and put them back up. But now that they are ready, I'm excited to use my lunch break to get the books back on the shelf. I have probably got about 40 minutes left of my lunch break after I just scarfed some food down to get something in. So I'm going to try and get as many books on the shelf as I can in that time, but there is a chance I may have to do some after work and maybe on tomorrow's lunch break as well. But before we dive into the bookcase assembly, I also wanted to give you a quick reading update on the books that I have been reading during the moving process. So without further ado, first on the agenda is the book that I was reading in my last vlog, and that was Wayward by Amelia Hart. This happens to be the first fiction book that I finished in 2023, so I guess I was off to a little bit of a slow start in terms of reading, but I couldn't be happier because this book was such a great way to start my like official year of reading. It was of course a debut, so I'd never read anything by this author before, and the genre itself I guess pushed my boundaries a little bit. It had some elements that were contemporary because we have 3 protagonists, one of whom is in the modern day, but the other 2 protagonists are in the 40s and then the 1600s, so there is an element of historical fiction in this novel, which is something that I pretty much never read. I haven't really got any historical fiction on my shelves unless you count Bridgerton, but I think Bridgerton pushes the boundaries of historical fiction in terms of accuracy, so I wouldn't necessarily put it in that genre. So historical fiction isn't something that I read very often, and then the other element of this novel is kind of fantasy in terms of magical witchiness kind of thing. So again, fantasy isn't something that I read very often, and it's definitely not something that I gravitate towards that often. So both of those parts of the novel kind of pushed my boundaries a little bit, but it was so gripping. I love books with multiple protagonists and multiple timelines, and so this just gripped me from start to finish, and from reading the blurb I thought it sounded really interesting, but it ended up exceeding all expectations because it was just so good. And with that said, having given it 5 stars, I'm actually going to make this book the first book that I put on my new shelves, and I'm going to make this shelf right here a hardback shelf. So pride of place goes to Wayward. I'm going to hold it in place with my coffee cup because I don't know if it'll stand up straight without other books there. So there we go, 1 book down, hundreds to go. Another book that I have been reading and not loving so much has been The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. Now, I can't fully remember why I chose to get this book, but I seem to recall that it was on a TikTok list that I saw of someone recommending books, and I can't remember what theme they gave or like what the list was all about, but I remember adding it to my Amazon wish list after seeing that list, and then someone was kind enough as to gift it to me, but it sat on my shelves for quite a while and I hadn't really gotten around to reading it. And if I'm completely honest, I only started reading it this last week because circumstantially it happened to be at the top of one of the boxes of books, and because of all of my books being packed away, I didn't really have much choice for what to read next after I'd finished Wayward, so I ended up picking this one up just from the top of a box, and I'm not loving it. I'm going to read you the blurb just to give you a bit of a overview of what the book is about. So it says, a child killer writes to a 19-year-old woman. He is serving his 23rd year in prison. She, under the guise of a seemingly sweet and bland persona, is intent on seducing a young neighbourhood boy. Teetering on the knife edge between the American dream and the American nightmare, the end of Alice unpicks the darkness of inconceivable desire and the destruction and horror left in its wake. Now, I would not recommend this book for a few reasons. First of all, and I guess most specifically to this book, the writing style I just don't like. It's very fragmented and it feels very difficult to engage with and to kind of lose yourself in. It just feels very choppy, and I personally don't really like that. And then the other thing that I don't really like about this book is just the themes, the plot, the characters, kind of the entire thing. It obviously, as the blurb suggests, is a book that deals with some quite dark and disturbing topics. Now, of course, for some people that is like an immediate no-go, and that is obviously completely fine. I do like reading books that are a little bit boundary pushing. I like thrillers, I like horrors, and I like books that do make you feel a little bit like nervous and on edge. But I think what I like is a book where there are things like that happening, but you have a main character or characters that you can really root for, that you want to see sort of coming out of the other side of hardship. And so I guess like Stephen King is an example of that, where generally speaking you have a character who finds themselves in the midst of some kind of horror, but they are not the horror themselves. You know, in Misery we have this author who is held captive. In It we have this group of children who are fighting against evil. In The Shining we have the hotel as this force of evil, and then the characters are kind of at its mercy. So you're not rooting for the evil, you're rooting for the person against the evil. Another example, which is quite similar to some of the themes explored in this book, is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which is a book that is obviously super traumatic and deals with some really dark and quite harrowing topics. But our main characters are characters that you can root for and that you feel a lot of empathy for, and you feel just so upset and disturbed by what has happened to them. This book, on the other hand, shows the people who are perpetrating these horrible things. You know, instead of seeing someone experiencing horror, you see the people inflicting the horror. And so not only is it a fragmented writing style, but equally the characters, you can't have any empathy for them because they are just completely deplorable and horrible people. So when it comes to like those factors all woven in together, it makes it really hard to engage with the book because there's so little to root for. And I feel like for me personally, I like to have something that I'm rooting for, that I am like propelled by, to sort of see how the character turns out, and I just don't feel that way about this book. It is, however, a very short novel, so I'm gonna finish it just because I want to tick it off the list and just like see what happens. But not really a fan and would not recommend it. And then finally, in terms of reading updates, we have one more book that I'm yet to start but will be my next read after I finish The End of Alice, and that is The Hike by Lucy Clarke. Now this is actually an ARC which is coming out in April of this year, but I was lucky enough to be sent a proof copy by Harper Fiction, and I cannot wait to dive in because I read The Castaways by Lucy Clarke. I think it was at some point last year, but to be honest, my last year of reading has been such a blur that I honestly don't know exactly when I read it, but I do know that I enjoyed it a lot. It was a book or a thriller about, well, a thriller is a book, but it was a thriller book about a plane crash, and there were multiple perspectives, multiple timelines, fragmented pieces of information that reveal exactly what happened, both leading up to the plane crash and then after the plane has crashed, and all of the things that occur on this like desert island where these castaways are left. And it was just so engaging, so fast paced, and I absolutely loved it. As you can tell from both Wayward and Castaways, I just love those books that weave together multiple different pieces of a story, gradually sort of drip feeding you like characters, perspectives and different timelines to build up this bigger picture. And so The Hike, I think, takes a similar sort of format in terms of the different characters and different timelines, and the blurb just sounds so intriguing. So it says, if I can find it, "There's no turning back. Every year, 4 old friends get together for a holiday, and this year is an unbeatable adventure. A wild hike in the beautiful Norwegian wilderness, with wild paths that wind through icy blue lakes, fairy tale forests and towering peaks. It's the perfect place to escape, but tension soon builds between the friends, secrets and lies unearthed with every step. And they're not the only ones looking to lose themselves out there. In this deep, dark wilderness, there is a killer on the trail." I just already know from that I am going to love this book, so I'm trying to get through this one as quickly as I can to make sure that I can get straight onto this one because it just sounds so good. So with that said, that is my reading update, and now I'm going to use the rest of my lunch break to try and get the rest of the shelves looking like they should, because I'm sick of seeing naked bookshelves. The shelves are back in town, and I have to say it feels so nice to have finally been able to unleash my books from their captivity in boxes and put them back on the shelves where they belong in all their glory. And it just feels so nice to finally have fully stacked shelves again, and also what a relief to have ticked that job off the to-do list, because taking books out of boxes is not only physically intensive but also such a mental game of Tetris, because suddenly you have all of these books that you knew you already had but haven't thought about how to organise for however long you've lived in your last house. So for us, we'd been in York for 2 years, and aside from the occasional new book being added to the shelf, there was never much movement or reorganisation. So whatever we had decided when we first moved into that house was just what we stuck with, and just new books kind of were added into that process. So suddenly when you see all of the books laid out in front of you and you have this opportunity and blank canvas to reorganise and categorise everything in, it becomes such a question mark over everything, and I feel like it still doesn't feel like an entirely completed job. I'm not 100% set on the way that I've categorised some of these books, and also where I've placed some of the genres and some of the collections, but on the whole the books are on the shelf, and that is the main thing. One thing that I did try out, which is new to me at least for this house, is that instead of just having all of the books in their respective genres or categories or collections, I have had these shelves behind me. So there are 3 shelves over here, and they are all belonging to books that I have pretty much all read. There were a few exceptions, mostly in the classics collections where the books are part of physical collections where they all look really nice next to each other, so it doesn't make sense to split them up. But for the most part, these 3 shelves behind me are books that I have already read, and then this shelf here, which is the first shelf in the room, is now my unread books shelf. And I thought that it would be interesting to see if it kind of encourages me to maybe do a little bit more reading, but also read more of the books that I already own by putting them all in one physical location where I can literally see these are all of the books that I have still got to read that I already own. So I may or may not stick with that in the long term, but right now, while I was unpacking the books, it seemed like quite a nice way to organise things. And then of course, as I tick them off the list and as they get read, then I will figure out where I want to put them in the main shelves. But for now, they're on my TBR holding shelf, and I feel like it's quite nice to be able to just see everything you own and see what you have yet to tick off your list, and I'm quite pleased with it. So we'll see if I stick with it in the long run, but for now I think it's going to be a fun experiment to see if it helps me get more reading done. So with that said, I have another book to add onto the shelves because I have just finished up reading The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes, and I don't know if any of you guys either are on TikTok or are fans of America's Next Top Model back from way back in the day, but there is a quote, and I think it's Tyra Banks, that says, "You are so bad, I wanted to give you a 0, but that's not possible, so I give you a 1. And that is how I feel about this book. I gave this book 1 star, and I give out high book ratings very liberally. I just read Wayward and I gave that 5 stars. I love giving books 5 stars because I like to feel like when I put all of my time into reading a book, it's for enjoyment. So it's very rare that I pursue a book that I'm not really enjoying, but because this one was so short, I just decided to press onwards and get it done. But I hated it. The subject matter was horrific. The writing style was really hard to get into, very janky, very fragmented, and just not very easy to lose yourself in. And on the whole, I did not like this book at all. So I've gone from reading my first 5-star book of the year, which was Wayward, to my first and hopefully only 1-star read of the year as well. But it's another book ticked off the list, and I'm going to put this one on my crime shelf right here. And then the next book that I will be reading is right here, The Hike by Lucy Clarke, and I'm going to be starting this one after I finish work today. But for now, it is lunchtime and I'm planning to head out for a little walk, so I'll catch up with you later on for some reading. Now, I will be the first person to admit that my reading stats for 2023 so far are not very impressive. It is currently March, and that means that we're like a quarter of the way into the year, and so far I have read 4 books, which is not very impressive, and if I carry on at this trajectory I'll only end up reading something like 12 books for the year, which is fine, although not quite the 75 book goal that I usually set for myself. But either way, I'm going for a quality over quantity approach this year, and so if I find time for reading and if I have things that I want to read, then brilliant. If I can't fit it in alongside work and alongside hobbies, then that's okay too. I think I got into the habit throughout the couple of years where we were in a lot of lockdowns and I was on furlough for quite a long time of being able to read all the time, and then since getting back to work full time and having loads of other things going on, I haven't been able to adjust my mindset for how much I should be reading. But this year I'm trying to just take that quality over quantity approach and actually give myself time to enjoy the books that I'm reading, and however many books I read is however many books I read. But all that is just a big fat ramble, because what I actually meant to say was I've read 4 books this year and can confidently say that The Hike is my favourite book that I've read so far this year. And that might not sound like a very substantial statement, because obviously it is just one of 4, so reaching the top spot, not that difficult, but I loved this book. It was to a T what I enjoy in thrillers. It kept me entertained and hooked right from the first page to the very last. I felt like it kept the mystery alive and just kept feeding you little bits of information in such a way that you constantly wanted to read more, and it just kept you wanting more right to the very end. And I think for me, at least, with quite a short attention span, a book like that just constantly is drip feeding information is the best way to keep me engaged, especially with mystery thrillers, where obviously you're kind of doing a bit of the legwork as you try and figure out what you think has happened, but the author kind of keeps you on your toes all the way through and doesn't let you get too confident or comfortable in your estimation of what has happened. So I really, really liked it. And I would also like to say that I think there must be something about Lucys who write mystery thrillers, because both Lucy Clarke and Lucy Foley just write exactly the sort of books that I love to read, and every single one of their books that I've read have been incredible, although I definitely have favourites from each of them. And so while last year I read The Castaways by Lucy Clarke and really enjoyed it, The Hike was just me to a T. I just loved it. I felt like the way that it was split out between these 4 perspectives of these 4 friends who were on a holiday together, but also moves between different timelines and gives you hints into both a previous mystery and a current one, was just so engaging, and I really, really like how that played out. And the setting of these Norwegian mountains and it being a hiking holiday, I personally really enjoyed, because obviously I like being out in nature, I like hiking, and I just think that this book created a really vivid setting, as well as creating a really interesting network of characters. So for me, it was perfect. I absolutely loved it. So it's definitely my favourite book of the year so far. Favourite of 4 books, but I'm confident that even as I read hopefully a few more books throughout the year, it will still remain my favourite, or certainly one of my favourite reads of the year, because it was just everything that I look for in a thriller. And I'm just on a roll this year. I have been picking some really good books and I've just been enjoying everything. Today has been snowing all day, and I was so sure that we were coming out of winter and into spring, and then the last couple of days have just completely rained on my parade, or rather snowed on my parade. So it has been a work day today, but I just finished off reading The Hike after I finished work, and I am now planning to make the most of a cosy evening under the blanket and figure out what I want to read next. But I'll bring this vlog to an end here, so thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed an insight into the first few weeks in the new house, and I'm hoping that now that we are fully settled in, it will be back to a more regular programmed schedule of YouTube content. But thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next one.